That one was taken just before the insurrection on the Capitol happened. So this was when President Trump and some other speakers were giving some speeches in front of the White House, and there were just so many people. This was, of course, January 2021, and I I remember just looking out into the crowd and feeling like I had never seen that many people in my whole life and one at one time. And I think that was probably because of like after the really apex of the pandemic, it was just like so wild to see that many people at the same time. Um, but it was just so wild to see so many flags waving around, American flags, all the red um, clothing that everybody was wearing, red, white, and blue. And it was just surreal because you didn't realize that history was going to happen just a couple of hours later. This was such a fun match to cover. So this was the College Squash Association final championships. They were held here at the Penn Squash Center, and I don't think this was the final match between Penn and Harvard, but it might have been like the second to last final match. And the thing about this match was that the crowd and the players were just so wrapped up in the game and truly encapsulated by it that it wasn't really the athletes playing that I was interested in, but more so like the visceral reactions. Because of course, like the teammates get so hyped when like the Penn person gets a score, gets a point. So that was what drew me to that, and I was luckily right against the glass, so it kind of brought an interesting angle to it too. Yeah, so this was after the protesters took a little walk around the Independence Mall area, about just a block or so, and they were walking back to like kind of the area right before I'm forgetting the street right now. I think it was Market Street or something, but the street that separates the mall into two kind of. And I saw the Liberty Bell and I was just like standing there. I guess with my photography, I try to play with the reflections a bit because I think it, when done well, I think it can add a lot to the story of like creating this complexity of the event. So I was just walking by the Liberty Bell. I had been here before, of course, so I knew that you could see the Liberty Bell through the window. So I was just hanging out and I happened to see somebody else with a Ukrainian flag walking by, and I thought, oh, like if this is framed well, this could be something. So I just stood there for a few minutes and waited for hopefully somebody else with a flag to walk by, and luckily it came. This was in New York City, at Union Square, and this was following the Asian spa shootings in Atlanta. And this was an event that, I mean, it was in New York, so I had to travel a little bit from Philly to get there, but it was really something that meant so much to me to cover because it was this grief and sadness that I was holding just in my head for my community. And the only way I could really express that was to be able to document the vigils and protests and all of the collective actions that people were taking in order to make myself feel better, but also support and give voice to the community. So this was just one of those quiet moments that um, it really meant a lot to me, I think. Yeah. So this was really fun. This was the first Holy celebration that I had been to at Penn, because of the pandemic had canceled the others while I was here. So everybody was just so energetic and happy, and obviously it's such a visual event because of the colored powders. But I think this was just another one of those moments where I was trying to step back a little bit, take a few minutes to try and just survey the scene, and really hone in on an individualistic like approach to it, because it is such like a group event, but let's try and find a different perspective was my thinking, I guess. So I was just again standing there, waiting for a moment to come, and then this student just looked so blissful, I would say. Um, and it was just, yeah, it was one of those lucky moments for sure. Um, but yeah, I think that's probably one of the things that I've learned in my photography journey is just like instead of just being so reactionary, really take a moment to think about how you want to compose your shot and what else you want to tell that's kind of more nuanced. This was Lil Yachty's set during Spring Fling, and we knew that they were all going to be throwing up the water into the air because they had been passing out like the water bottles for them. And Lil Yachty did a countdown of 3, 2, 1, and it was pretty. I was scared that I was going to miss the moment, but I was positioned right at the front, right in front of the stage, and right before the barricade, and I I honestly this moment is a blur when I was taking this picture. It was kind of just like really got to get that photo. But I think I mean the best way that I could have set it up was just like I knew that it was going to happen, so I set my settings beforehand to really try and like freeze that water movement in time. Um and I was right in front of this wonderful group of students that were just so happy and just like really they really felt the concert, I think. They were really into all of the artists. So that I would say that's how that one worked. So this is the photo from the steeplechase at the Penn Relays, and I mean, I love photographing water. So when I was doing, I tried experimenting with swimming and diving earlier in my senior year last year, and I think that probably very much helped how this image was created. So just like capturing this movement was it was really interesting because like they make these splashes once they jump into the little puddle, and just trying to get somebody still in focus while like having that low shutter speed to get that water moving. It was definitely trial and error. So this one again, a lot of these are very lucky. But I think it was just it was so cool to be able to have that time to play around with these different techniques that I had been slowly building up throughout the year. So this photo was behind, I like to think of it as like a behind the scenes look. So after people had marched through West Philly protesting, we ended up at Malcolm X Park, and some of the move organizers and family members spoke at the end. And this was just one of those moments where I try to capture some emotion when I'm covering events, because I think that's really at the heart of it. You can have like these wider pictures of people with their fists up or like with a megaphone in their hands. But I mean, at the heart of this story in particular, I think it was just this sense of loss that this family had felt, and 30 years later they still felt it. So this person, the woman on the woman who's hugging, she's an activist in here in Philly. And it was just I unfortunately didn't catch the name of the person that she's hugging, but it was just one of those more tender moments where that drew my eye. This picture was when all of the 2021 graduates were filtering out of Franklin Field, and they were looking around for their family members because of course that was the year when family and friends and other spectators weren't able to sit in on graduation in Franklin Field. So it was just this moment of like all these heads, just like all these caps and gowns, and like I think I was interested in looking for people who were wearing like masks and stuff that could indicate that this was something of an unusual commencement ceremony. So again, this is one of those moments where I was just like standing in one spot at the end on 34th Street, where I just waited for someone to hopefully come by and get the shot that I wanted. And luckily this girl wasn't wearing one of the masks that Penn had specifically made for the 2021 graduates. Honestly, this day and that whole string of days of protests really are they're kind of a blur by this point. It was just so action packed. But this was one of those moments. It was June 1st, and it was after the police had fired tear gas into the crowd of protesters and media people who were on the highway on 676. So this was after that, probably like an hour and a half, 2 hours after that, just around the Ben Franklin Parkway. And it was just kind of this more silent moment of there was like a line of police officers on one side and then the protesters on the other, and you can see some of them with their hands up behind their heads, um, facing the police. But for this photo in particular, uh, this man was just walking around. I don't think he spoke, if I remember correctly. But it was just like his he wasn't looking at the police, which I thought was interesting. He was kind of just pacing back and forth in this little space between the two groups that had been created. And I mean, the light was beautiful at this time of day. And luckily it was facing his back, so it's kind of got this like backlit glow to him. Um, and I think now this picture symbolizes to me the resilience of the community in really continuing to stand up for what they believe in. And I mean, the angle of looking down, or well, the angle of being down and looking up at the man, I feel like it kind of gives him this like sense of power, empowerment, I guess. Um, yeah, I it was it was quite a time to cover those protests. This is definitely one of the quieter photos, but I've always been attracted to this one because I took this on the very last day of June in 2020, and that had been after all of the protests or the heat of the protests. And it was the conclusion of my final, or no, it was the conclusion of my first month back at Penn after coming back from the pandemic. So I had come back to Philly on May 30th, the day right before the protests, or May 31st. And so like this month had been so crazy. And then I was just like sitting on Penn Commons, and I just saw this moment of this woman walking alone, and it it was just very peaceful, but also spoke of isolation to me. And like the nobody was on campus. So it's just like this moment of solitude, but also kind of bittersweet. So I think it encapsulated my time in the summer at Philly so far. That's exactly it, honestly. I feel like with any politician, but especially presidents in particular, there's always the same photo of them at the podium or like just their face and up. And I definitely did take those pictures too. But what I try to do in those kinds of events is see a different framing or composition that could be more interesting and make you stop. And so this photo was taken on the meteor risers. So obviously there's a lot of camera crews that are there from the TV stations. So this picture, whenever I look at it, I kind of at first think that it's the screen of one of the camera people's cameras, but it's not. I have to like remind myself of that every time. It's actually him framed between a cameraman and the camera. So it was kind of just this perfect little window that just happened to work out very well, because he's face on in the middle. Yeah, I'm trying to just look for those different perspectives when I'm out there. This photo was taken when President Trump had a town hall. I think it was an ABC town hall at the National Constitution Center, and there were some supporters, but there were also some protesters. So I thought this is it really represented the dynamic between the two polarizing sides of the country. Um, and I mean, the person in the middle is mockingly dressed as Trump, but they're still dressed as Trump. So it was just, there's so many facets of that photo that I think are interesting to spend a little bit of time with. Yeah, sure. So he was doing one of his rallies in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, back on the west side of the state. And this was him boarding the plane to leave the rally. So this was at the conclusion of the event. And I mean, again, this is one of those moments where you see all these photos of the politicians, just like them entering the plane and stuff like that. But there's definitely something to be said with the the I guess the symbolism or not of the United States of America words that are on Air Force One. So this photo was cropped obviously to make that work, but it was just fascinating to me to play around with his supporters in the foreground, like waving goodbye to him, and his hand reaching through to this like unite word, which is of course united, from the United States of America, um, and just kind of play around with what I mean. It's up to the viewer how they want to interpret that. Um, this was a pretty wild night as well. This is the end of October 2020, and protesters had taken to the streets on the day that Walter Wallace was killed by police in his West Philly home. And this was taken either just before or right after midnight of that day. And it was there was a very big police presence that night, to try and control the group of protesters. But there was again just this really quiet, eerie moment of the all these armed police officers with their shields and batons, just standing there kind of as if they're waiting for something to happen. So it was kind of like transporting you back to another time. I think it was just like this kind of with the older buildings and stuff like that. It was just kind of it created a very movie-like scene. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I really loved going to the swim and dive meets my last year at Penn, and it was just really fun to play around with the different perspectives, as much as you can at the pool, because obviously you can't like go have an underwater camera or anything like that. So this was just taken poolside, and it was just again really one of those lucky moments where everyone is lined up perfectly and in the same exact position. And I think it just takes, once again, that patience to just wait for the image to come to you that you've already formulated in your mind rather than reacting to what's going on in front of you. Uh, I'm about to start my fall photo internship at the Seattle Times. And this summer, I recently completed a fall fellowship at the Texas Tribune in Austin. And I mean, it's been wonderful being able to get this real world experience right out of graduation. Like I tell people that I feel like I've lived 4 years since May because it's just like all of these new experiences throughout the country have just been so eye-opening. And I'm also doing some personal work on the side still. So I'm personally interested in like themes of identity and belonging. So I'm adopted from China, so I'm interested in telling those stories of fellow Chinese adoptees, especially as we all reach this age of like really reflecting on what our identities mean. So that's some personal work that you can find at my website, which is just my name, KylieCooper.com. And yeah, my Instagram is also Kylie Cooper Photo, which is where I'll mostly be sharing updates of my work at the Times.